maybe. There we go. We're going to talk about chitosan. What is it? How is it used? Okay, I'm going to talk about what LAFFORT do and the research behind it. Really, the thing for me is take off my LAFFORT hat and I put on my winemaker hat and I say, well, what am I trying to gain out of this? What's the knowledge that I need to do to be able to use chitosan in my basic winemaking? Okay. Now, what is Brettanomyces? How do we prevent growth? How much chitosan can I add? How much do I need to add? Is it legal? How quick is it? What does it do with malolactic fermentation? There's a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to try and address all of these questions during the presentation. And if you have more, remember, just use the chat feature and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Okay. I'm going to start out with Brettanomyces, okay? And we're not going to talk it from the beer brewing perspective because beer brewers love Brettanomyces. They think it does a great job. We're talking about it from as a spoilage yeast, which seems to thrive very well in wine. Tolerates SO2, pH is pretty nice for it, alcohol is fine, it'll eat basically anything, sugar, phenolics, carbon substrates. It's very well adapted to wine. It will grow in your wine if left unchecked. That's the key. And of course, the problem is, whilst it does belong, it belongs to the microbial biome, and certain factors will influence its development, we don't like its effects in general. We don't like the byproducts of Brettanomyces. So what is this chitosan thing? We're going to leap into chemistry. We're not going to do too much on the molecular diagrams here. Just going to give you some background there. Amine groups, hydroxyl groups, polymeric structures. Chitosan is formed. There's two ways of forming chitosan. One is through shellfish, the crustaceans, basically. It's the shell of crustaceans. And also through the fermentation of Aspergillus niger, it's a byproduct produced by it. That's actually, we get our chitosan, food grade chitosan comes in the wine industry, comes from fermentation of Aspergillus niger. It's totally biodegradable. It is not toxic. The average dietary intake there of 16 grams per day per kilogram means that in theory, I could eat 1.5 pounds of chitosan every day, which would actually bankrupt me. It's not cheap, but it's totally fine to use in wine and food, etc. So that's chitosan. Chitosan. I want to make a very important distinction here. Chitin glucan. Now, also legal for use in wine. Okay, chitin glucan is a different polymer. I'm not going to discuss why, but it's a different polymer. It doesn't have the anti-microbial, anti-Brettanomyces aspects that chitosan has, right? But you'll find chitin glucan out there. It's a great fining agent, great to reduce colloidal content, great to help settling. And so make that distinction between, and it's also a big, tremendous price difference too. Just bear that in mind. Okay, so that's, what is it? All right, now let's look about, is it regulated? Of course it is. Okay, how much can I add to my wine? Now, the EU regulated it some time ago, and the TTB in the US regulated it reasonably recently. Now, there's a pretty big distinction, though. In the EU, you can use chitosan for a whole bunch of different applications. You can remove heavy metals, remove copper and iron casts, ochratoxin A, and also D there, reduction of the population of undesirable microorganisms. You can see down the bottom there, the dose rates are pretty variable. It's only 10 grams per hectoliter for reducing microorganisms. That's in the EU. It's the same dose rate in the US for reducing undesirable microorganisms, and that's actually the only usage of chitosan that is allowed by the TTB. Removing Brettanomyces in wine. Now, a little clarification there. If you need some light bedtime reading, Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 24, or Title 27, Chapter 24. You can read all about wine regulations. But basically, the chitosan is currently categorized as administratively approved, which means you can use it for domestic wine, right? within the US, but you can't technically export it. If you want to have a conversation about that, I'm more than happy to, but that's definitely a conversation outside of this webinar. Happy to go into regulations. All right, so that's regulation. You can use it. Go for it. How does it work? Okay. We're going to look at a few microscopic illustrations here. First, we're going to start with a happy, healthy cell membrane. This guy, let's move my mouse over there. I think you can see my mouse. Up the top there, T0, as in before the chitosan, 20,000 times magnification. You can see a happy cell membrane and a cell wall. The lower screen, you can see the visible organelles there. Fine. All right. But then, 8 days later, you can see on the right-hand side, we've magnified 20,000 on the top and 40,000 on the bottom again. The upper picture there shows the presence of the chitosan molecule, which is quite large. And really what's left is a skeleton of Brettanomyces. And the same, getting in closer, you can see the destruction of all of the intracellular medium. No more visible organelles. Let's go look at that again, all right? Day 0, I should say, this one here, okay, this is in a model medium, it's not in wine. Right? Now, on the next one, this one here is actually in wine. Okay? So the cells are a little distorted by the environment. One's not the best environment. Brettanomyces is happy to be there, but one's not the best environment. Day 1, you can see already there are effects of the chitosan. Day 4, they're pretty much dead. And by day 8, the majority of cells don't actually have a cell wall anymore or any visible membrane. Pretty much toast. Works the same in a model solution as it done in wine. It basically blows up the cell. Chitosan is very effective on Brettanomyces. So, chitosan, this stuff. This one is Enobret. Okay, Enobret is a chitosan product. It's actually a mix of chitosan plus some enzymes. We're going to talk about the enzymes later. It comes in 2 package sizes. This is a 250-gram can. Also comes in this handy barrel dose. Show you how the barrel dose works. It should be pretty easy. All along, you basically it's designed to be as easy as possible. Open up the container. Get some water. You put the water. You basically fill up the bag. Slowly but surely. I'll try not to make a mess. Fine in the cellar to spill water, but if you're doing it in your office, it's kind of annoying. Fill it up to the line. There we go. Put that down gently so I don't make a loud clanking noise. Put the cap back on. Basically, the container holds. There we go. You mix it up. This is your barrel dose. Takes a bit. You've got to get the sediment off the bottom. There's probably better ways of doing this. Basically, you get all your sediment off the bottom. And now, this package, you just basically open the cap again, tip the whole thing into your barrel. It's designed to be exactly 1 barrel dose. And actually, we changed it a little bit. It's now 23 grams for a barrel dose. It's a little more accurate in the 10 grams per hectoliter. Okay, let's go back to sharing this screen. Back to the presentation. So, okay, there's two sizes of Enobret. The Enobret is a blend of enzymes and chitosan. Recommended dosage is 100 milligrams per liter. The maximum legal dosage is 250 milligrams per liter. And if you can do some pretty easy math, you can figure out what percentage of chitosan there is in there and what percentage of enzymes. Okay. What does it do? Well, it blows them up, basically. That's the whole idea. You can, from the very get-go, it dislocates the structure, it destroys the cell walls. It's efficient, it's timely. You can use it as a curative treatment. We can use it as a preventative treatment. So these enzymes, why are these enzymes in there? basically it's to optimize the sedimentation of the Brett so that the chitosan can be more effective. I did not change this graph from the French. Sorry. First French word I learned at LAFFORT was témoin, which is control. Okay. And then so, which is alone. Okay. So basically, what we're looking at here is 6 different treatments. Well, the control and 5 different treatments with and the cell counts of Brettanomyces in the wine. So we're starting off here with looks like 1.5 by 10 to the 5 cells per mil. It's a pretty heavy load. Chitosan by itself reduced the cell counts down to about 100 cells per mil. But Brett, through the activity of the enzymes helping facilitate the lowering the viscosity and dropping the sedimenting the cells more effectively, got them down to 10 cells per mil. So an extra log reduction. Then we have looked at a bunch of other enzymes as well before we came up with the particular blend we have in the chitosan. Okay? So there's our rationale for its chitosan plus enzymes in it, right? Which is pectinases and beta-glucanases, which help sediment. So that's, that graph was interesting in the sense of it showed some cell counts and some reductions of cell counts. But there's a couple of key things here. First, we want to know, how do we analyze cell counts and how can we do that in the winery? And then what's the risk factor? Epifluorescence microscopy is very rarely used. It's quick and easy, but it's very poor detection. I've not seen it in the wine industry. The 2 I have seen most is counting on growth media. We're talking 7 days plating, right? Plating. Super sensitive. It'll do 1 colony forming unit per 100 mils. You can even get it to produce 1 colony forming unit per bottle of wine. There's a really long wait time though. That is, the big playoff there is the sensitivity against the wait time. qPCR, this is a technique that ETS use. They call it scorpions. It's quick. That's its claim to fame. Right? They'll turn around in 1 day sometimes. But it's expensive. Right? It's very technical. But the detection limit is not nearly as good. They do offer a concentrated scorpion, which I think will get you 1 cell per mil as opposed to 10 cells per mil. But you can most definitely have a wine that shows clean for Brett, 0 detected, and go to bottle unfiltered and come back a year later and have Brettanomyces growing there because it's just not finding those, those very, very sparse cells. So if you really want to know what's in your wine, if you're doing bottling, growth media is the most effective. So the risk factor, okay. 1 to 10 cells per mil, colony forming unit, cells per mil. It's a fairly restrained, there's not much risk, right? You can use chitosan as a preventative measure. 10 to 100, there's risk, but you're not going to get any synthesis of ethyl phenols. Same with 10 to 100. Once you get 100 to 1,000. Once you get over 10 to the 3, you have cells growing and the risk of synthesis of 4-ethylphenol. Really, your use of chitosan is curative at this point. Another question I didn't put up there is, and I get to ask this a lot, does chitosan remove ethyl phenols and ethyl glycols? Unfortunately, the answer is no. What chitosan does is it kills the existing Brettanomyces cells and prevents further synthesis of your ethyl phenols. But it won't remove what's already there. You can use reverse osmosis for that. That's another technique. What chitosan does is it prevents further growth. Okay, now we're going to, this is actually there's about 5 slides in this section, right? It's a fairly complex trial we looked at because we wanted to know how persistent chitosan was. Does it keep working? That's key, really. Do we just add it and then do we have to keep adding it, or do we add it and it's fine? All right. So I lost count of how many variables there are in this trial, but we started out with a wine from the southeast of France it had Brett growing. Okay, it was about 5 by 10 to the 4 cells per mil, 50,000 cells per mil. It definitely had Brett growing because there were 332 micrograms per liter of combined 4-ethyl phenol and 4-ethyl glycol. So both were already in. So we treated the wine with Brett, 100 milligrams per liter. The first split we did was we wanted to see if racking had an effect on the further synthesis and further growth, or not racking. Okay, and then with both of those treatments, racked and unracked, we thought, well, that's what happens if we recontaminate it. Because that happens in cellars. Okay, and then we recontaminated after 3 different periods, but they turn out to be not consequential. Really, we're just looking at the recontamination process. There are also a couple of controls. All right. So the untreated control is the wine at the very top. Okay, it's the red wine from the southeast of France. We just basically left it as is. The second control, we wanted to compare a physical stabilization process. Right? We've sterile filtered it. Interestingly, it was recontaminated. We didn't intentionally recontaminate it, but it was recontaminated, which in reality, that's what happens in your cellar. It's very hard to keep a sterile wine sterile. All right, so there's a couple of graphs here. They're not particularly pretty, but what I'll do is I'll try and lead you through them both. All right, here, the first one is for the treated wine, racked after 8 days. And the next one I'll show you is what happens if you don't rack the wine. Okay? There's five lines on this that bounce around, okay? Top line, the red one, number 1, I'm going to put my mouse on it too, this one here. This is the untreated wine. And the line shows the cell counts, right? So basically hovered around 10 to the 4, 10 to the 5. And on the far right-hand side, we have the final, after 4 months, 4-ethyl phenol, 4-ethyl glycol combined measurement, 2252. Most definitely a wine that was affected and tainted by Brettanomyces. Second one we're going to look at, number 2, is the treated wine. Yes, this guy here, the black line with the see-through circles. So everything starts up here, okay, at the 10 to the 4, 10 to the 5 level, because that's the cell count in the wine. And the treated wine was treated, and within a week, 7 days, 8 days, dropped down to 0 cells per mil. So the chitosan was effective. It looked like there was a little bounce up again. Went up to 10 to the 2, then dropped back down again. Ticked along, ended up being 316 micrograms per liter as a final combined 4EP, 4EG, pretty close to the initial starting point. It's a little lower than the initial starting point. We basically put that down to analytical error. Yeah, that's what it was. So the treated wine, it worked, okay? Interestingly, though, talking about wines that were racked after 8 days, immediately after the treatment was effective, I have 2 trials here, 3 and 4, which were recontaminated after a week, number 1 and number 2. All right, so trial 1, trial 2. So wine 3 here, I'm going to show here. This followed a similar path to the treated wine. It started up at 10 to the 4-ish. It dropped down to 0 because the chitosan worked. Bounced up a bit. It was because it was recontaminated. And then it kind of ended up growing more Brettanomyces. Surprise, surprise, it was recontaminated, right? First one ended up at 589 combined 4EP, 4EG. But then the second version, exactly the same treatment, where it was started out with 10 to the 4, dropped down to 0 with the chitosan worked. It was then recontaminated, and then it dropped back down again. But the second one only did 384 micrograms per liter. So really what this shows is that, there's a few factors here. One is if you don't treat the wine, you're going to have a Brett bloom. Two, if you sterile filter the wine and it gets recontaminated, you're going to have a Brett bloom. 3 is the treatment works, and if the wine's not recontaminated, it's fine. Okay? Lastly, though, treatment works, but if the wine is recontaminated, you may or may not have a Brett bloom. Okay, this will make more sense when we look at this next page. Now, this is the treated wine that was not racked. There's actually only four lines on this one. Okay, line number 1 is the same. It's the untreated wine, had a Brett bloom. Wine number 2 is basically the same too. It's the treated wine. Nothing happened. Okay, the cell counts dropped, peaked a little bit, but basically the 4EP, 4EG numbers ended up being about the same as the control, as the start. Wine number 3 was the wine that was recontaminated after a week. Let's follow that one if I get my mouse to appear here. So it started up here at 10 to the 4, 10 to the 5. It dropped down after 7 days to 0. And then it was recontaminated, but never really saw an increase in cell counts. This one actually ended up at 277 micrograms per liter. Again, more likely analytical variability than anything else. So basically, the wine that was not racked, was still on the Enobrett lees, kept the protection against Brettanomyces, and even though a wine was recontaminated by Brettanomyces, the chitosan that was still at the bottom in the lees of the wine was still effective and still prevented further Brettanomyces growth. Let's look at, we'll summarize it too in a table because this is the last slide on this trial. Okay, so we've got here is down the bottom, the untreated wine. Don't do anything, you're going to have a very high production of 4-ethylphenol. I think we're all familiar with that. If the wine is not recontaminated, there's not a big difference whether you rack it or not. Okay? They're pretty similar levels. If you sterile filter it, you're going to have a big issue because it can easily get recontaminated in your cellar through topping, there's all sorts of possibilities there, right? And then the wine that was left on Enobrett had consistently the lowest final amounts of 4EP, 4EG of all of the trials. So leaving the wine on Enobrett lees for 3 months kept the protection against Brettanomyces. And these analyses were done at the end of the 4th month. That all made sense. Okay. So looking at here, looked at this little summary here of what went on. Leaving your wine on Enobrett, very effective to prevent the risk of recontamination. Okay. There are some Brett cells that remain viable after treatment with chitosan. If there's no recontamination, there's no production of ethyl phenols, and protection is ensured. Right? There is contamination. Treated wines are less sensitive to exogenous development or Brettanomyces growth, right? If you leave the chitosan there, less sensitive to being recontaminated. Sterile filtration is not the way to go because you leave this thing that's called a microbial void, right? There's basically nothing in the wine. There's no microbes there. So the first cell that gets in there says, time for a party. Let's just grow. Okay, so that's the rationale for not sterile filtering. Okay. All right. So now look at a couple of different risk levels now, low risk and high risk wines. And this really accentuates the concept of the persistence, right? So we're looking at one wine, and this is on this page, is 2 by 10 to the 3, right? 1,000 cells per mil. And the next page, we're going to look at a wine that had 100,000 cells per mil. What we did is we treated it with just straight up Enobrett. We basically mixed the whole thing together and poured it in the barrel. And then the second what we did is we let the Enobrett settle and all of the solids fell to the bottom, just like it would in a barrel, right? And then we took the supernatant liquid and treated the wine with the supernatant. Okay? We're pretty sure that there's a fraction of chitosan which is very active in this supernatant. What we had going on with this treatment, The untreated wine, the cell counts continued unchecked, basically. So 1E3 is the cell count, right? Untreated. 1E3 Enobret 100 mils. Go here. And you can't see the color, but the Enobret 100 mils and the supernatant of the Enobret 100 milligrams per liter both dropped down to 0 after, surprise, surprise, 10 days. All right. What happened over a period of time is that there was a slight increase in cell counts, up to 10 to the 1, of the wine that was treated with just the supernatant. Okay. But there was no increase in cell counts of the wine that was treated with Enobret. This is a low-risk wine. Okay, 10 to the 3 cells per mil. Not that many. All right. Now, by contrast, you were looking at a high-risk wine, so 10 to the 6 cells per mil. This is you're in danger zone here of synthesis of 4-EPs and so forth. All right. And in this case, the untreated wine, you can see the one at the top. Let's find my little mouse pointer there. There he is. He goes straight. It just keeps growing basically. In this case, also though, the supernatant was not effective. Supernatant, well, it had a very tiny effect basically. But the Enobret itself did have a log 3 reduction of the cell counts, and then they started growing again. What we're looking at here is your basic recommendation of 100 milligrams per liter of Enobret is good for low risk wines. If you're going high risk wines, if you analyze your wine quite late and you discover you have 10 to the 6 cells per mil, you really want to consider going up to 250 milligrams per liter of Enobret. Really just go for the full dose. Okay. Next question. Okay, so we've basically looked at persistence. All right, that was the bunch of slides on persistence. Next thing we're going to look at is malolactic fermentation. Okay, because this is when we came up with this Chitosan thing. All right. There were some winemakers who said, "What if I added it immediately post fermentation to prevent by Brett growing during ML?" Well, that's as it turns out, that's not such a good idea. What happens is, let's go the text here as well. What happened in this trial is that I'll run you through what the lines are first. The black one here is well, the grey one is 10-1 control. You can't see that, it's hidden behind all these red ones here. T450 is the 10-1, the control inoculated with LAFFORT 450 Preac bacteria, malolactic bacteria, and it worked fine. Okay, there was no Enobret, and it was inoculated with ML, and poof, there it goes. Went through ML, totally complete within 3 weeks. Every single dose of Enobret, however, inhibited ML without, and this is a dose of Enobret and inoculation with 450 Preac malolactic bacteria. So basically, if you're going to use Enobret immediately post-fermentation, post-primary, you'll see this antagonism between Chitosan and the malolactic bacteria. It won't go through ML. Okay. Now, a little bit down the bottom is interesting. Okay. You think about, put the winemaker hat back on, not the LAFFORT hat back on. So if you think about Burgundy, what they do in Burgundy is the wines will go through primary in the fall, and then in the spring they'll kick off the ML. Now we know of winemakers who are using Enobret in this way, basically knocking it out with Chitosan post primary, and then waiting until the following spring, so you have this development over the 6 months without completing ML, without SO2, but protected by Chitosan, and then inoculating after 6 months. I'll be honest, we don't recommend it, but we've heard people using it successfully. Okay, it takes a while, but it's one of those things you can do. Okay. There's another cool thing you can do with Enobret. What it does. This is part of the one of the LAFFORT themes we've been working on for the past 5 years or so is 6, 7 years maybe, is reducing SO2. And one of the key ways to reduce SO2 is to reduce the amount of molecules that bind SO2. Then you can add less SO2 and add less SO2 and still get the amount of free SO2 that you need. So we have this measurement here, CL35. It's the amount of SO2 required to give 35 milligrams per liter of free SO2. And obviously, the higher your CL35 is, the more binding compounds there are. So you can use using Inobret, right? Well, actually, the one on the left is using extralides, which is an enzyme, and lysozyme, which is what's an enzyme too? It kills gram-positive bacteria, right? That effectively reduces your CL35, right? And then the one on the right is where you're comparing SO2 at harvest to no SO2 and then aging with Inobret. Again, your CL35 is much lower, so you can add less SO2 to get the same amount of free SO2. Okay. Not the most simple concept to run through. Obviously, I've run through it a lot of times, so I can do it really quick, but that doesn't help anybody. Again, I'm happy to, any questions you have about this, please ask them. And as well, remember on this thing, we're talking about reductioning. We're talking about reducing SO2 in the concept of its antimicrobial properties. Inobret does not replace antioxidant properties of SO2. That's still a very key thing. So those two trials there were basically looking at the addition of SO2 compared to the addition of different products to reduce the amount of binding compounds produced in the wine to effectively reduce your total amount of SO2 you need to add to the wine. There was another one. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we've looked at, let's go back a bit in time. First, we looked at Brettanomyces. What is it? Okay, it's bad. Then we looked at what chitosan is. That's good. We looked at what chitin glucan is, which is good, but not to kill microbes, not to kill Brettanomyces. We looked at how you use chitosan and how you use Inobret specifically, right? And then we're really looking at when do you use this product, this stuff, right? So Inobret you use post ML. That's your time to do it. Inobret's very effective. You don't, unless you want to fool around with the pre-ML thing, which I don't recommend, but yeah, it's a post-ML thing. What we're looking at here is before alcoholic fermentation or after malolactic fermentation. So microcontrol is a product. It's Inobret, slightly different ratio. It's chitosan plus the enzymatic mix of pectinases and beta glucanases. It also has patatin in it, right? A fining product, potato protein, vegetable protein. Okay. Now the patatin in microcontrol adds to this mix and to the benefits here by decreasing the total microbial population by sedimenting, helping sediment, by aiding the speed of sedimentation, I should say. It's also it has an antioxidant function because it eliminates phenolic compounds that can oxidize the wine. It also makes it easier to find and filter your wines down the track. So this we're going to look at here. Another trial. I got about 3 pages for this trial, another multivariate trial. So the question is, in this instance, can I use chitosan or must to protect my wine against growth of Brettanomyces? Say I've got a heavy load of Brettanomyces that I know is coming in from my vineyard. Can I use chitosan without negatively affecting fermentation? Here we've got 2 controls and we've got 4 treatments, right? So this is, and they happen after destemming and crushing. The 2 controls, control 1 is 40 milligrams per liter of SO2. Control 3 is no SO2. All right, and then the treatments, we're looking at adding SO2 or not, and Inobret or microcontrol. Right. And then what we did for the processing step, we added a small amount. This is a basic, really rustic way of doing bioprotection. We added a small dose of the primary fermenting yeast, 50 milligrams per liter, F33, and then did a cold maceration for 3 days. And then we had added the rest of the yeast, 150 milligrams per liter, at the end of the cold maceration. So a 6-way trial. Top table here is the initial must analysis. Bottom table is the trial and the way they work. Okay, so let's first look at the top table. All right, top table. The wine itself, we're looking at 12.5% alcohol. It had 213 grams of sugar. TA, oh, whoops, sorry. That should be around 5.8 TA as tartaric acid, not sulfuric acid. And then there was a bunch of cells there. Look at this microbiology. Non-sac yeasts, 10 to the 5 actually, of non-sac, 7 by 10 to the 5 of total yeast. So there was some Saccharomyces and some non-sac in there. A bunch of acetic acid bacteria and a bunch of lactic acid bacteria. So this is there's a lot growing in this wine. This is something we want to be a little more careful. We want to take care of this wine. Okay. And if I look at the bottom table, these are the treatments, right? So there's 6 treatments, 6 columns, and 3 products, 3 rows. Okay, so 2 was added to the control, the first control, and also A and B. Micro control was added to 2 wines, and then Interbred to 2 other wines. Now let's look at. We're not going to worry about those details for just yet, because more important is let's look at what happened. This is your alcoholic fermentation kinetics. That's it. They started from day 4. Density dropped down by day 8. 2 of them were done. By day 10, everything was done. Okay. So basically, the wine went dry with all of these treatments. Okay. The Interbred and the microcontrol did not interfere with the progression of alcoholic fermentation. By contrast, the ones with sulfur in them actually finished a day after the non-sulfur controls. And the other little detail of note there, down on the bottom right there, is the final VA. That's again is H2SO4. The factor's all different. It's about 0.4 and about 0.6 compared to 0.25-ish, 0.28 all of the chitosan treated wines. So what the chitosan did, it actually knocked out a lot of that non-sac population and a lot of the microbes that produce VA. Okay. Your reduction in VA is actually the key part there. What else we got? Oh, ML. What happened with ML? Again, there's the 6 treatments. I got 2 sets of data here. Right. On the left is we just let the wine spontaneously go through ML. Right. And on the right, the 6 bars on the right, we inoculated with Lactinus B7, LAFFORT male-lactic bacteria. Spontaneous ML, everything went through ML. The height of the graph represents how many days. The height of the bar on the graph represents how many days it took to go through ML. So it was pretty slow to get through spontaneous. The B7, however, took 30 days. Everything happened at the same time, really. So basically, there was no difference between adding chitosan or no chitosan. So really, it seems if you add your, so put that in there too, you can add your chitosan before, before primary fermentation, after malolactic fermentation. You just can't add it in the middle, right? That's the key part of this. It's definitely a very good antimicrobial agent pre-primary fermentation and post-malolactic fermentation. Acetic acid bacteria. Actually, I'm just going to scoot past this one. It's microcontrol is very effective on acetic acid bacteria, and you can actually find with gelatin to get remove bacteria, but really it does work on acetic acid bacteria. That's probably why we had lower VAs. The final results for all of those chitosan treated products. Right, microcontrol, flashy thing, right? You can protect before alcoholic and after ML. We do have a straight chitosan, so we have Brettanomyces, this one here, Brett comes in the barrel of those, which is full of water now. Brett Org is this one, right? This is straight chitosan. Maximum legal dosage is 100 milligrams per liter, right? Because it's straight chitosan. Doesn't have the enzymatic activity. You have to talk to your own certifying body about organic regulations. I know that CCOF does one thing, Oregon Tilth does one thing, Washington State does one thing, etc. But it's an effective tool. Oh, and they're allergen free, which is kind of handy. They're also vegan. The microcontrol is a vegan finding agent. It's a potato protein. The chitosan is obviously vegan. It comes from Aspergillus niger, as are the enzymes. So, here's my list of questions again. But then I'm more interested in questions that you guys have. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have to stop sharing this screen so I can see this chat view. There we go. Stop sharing. That means I think I'm going to get, if I can find myself. Stop sharing. There I am. Now let me see if I can find the Q&A. Okay. I have a question. One question. So this was actually, just in. So if using a product like microcontrol in red must, for example, are there any studies done on eventual residual chitosan in a finished product that has been pressed, racked, and filtered? There's none left, basically. The chitosan is a fairly large molecule, and it sediments fairly well. There is probably that supernatant effect is the breakdown, whatever it is, molecules, right? But the physical chitosan is long gone. And once you press it and rack it, and if you're filtering it, it's gone. There'll be no residual chitosan. Here it says chat. And can you repeat the part about post-alcoholic fermentation, Bread addition, and springtime ML? Yes, I can. This is great. Ask me to repeat the part about that we don't recommend. Okay, so then I said there's another question up there as well. Okay, so what you would do, hypothetically, if you were to choose this path, would be at the end of primary fermentation, as later cooler climates, typically your wines do cool down. You would add the enobret, and the enobret will basically prevent ML from happening. That's what it does. You then put your wine aside in the cellar. Go to Hawaii for 6 months. Again, don't recommend this. You put your wine aside, and then in the spring, you then, I would recommend, if I was to recommend this, using something like B16, which is like a super strong build-up culture, malolactic bacteria, and then you would re-inoculate your wine for ML in the spring after a period of 6 months. Okay, so it's give it a really long period. You would probably also want to rack the wine to get rid of any residual bread activity down there as well. That's a cool thing. If I was still making wine, I'd probably try it. Okay, so I got another question here. Is 3 months the maximum recommended time a red wine can be aged on enobret? That's a really good question. The answer is no, it'll be fine. The enobret itself is not going to have any negative flavor impact on the wine. It basically doesn't taste like anything. Not that I'm about to start eating 3 pounds a day. So no, it's fine. The reason that the 3 month thing, the data that we had was really we were looking at what happened over that period of time, and we did our analysis after typical racking. And of course, remember we're based in Bordeaux, so the traditional school of thought is you rack your wine every 3 months. So we kind of looked at it that way. But no, you can definitely keep your wine on enobret for longer periods of time. Let's see, I think I've got questions in the chat view. And then I've got questions over here in the Q&A view. Okay, so how does cold stabilization and fining agents affect chitosan? I'm guessing you're talking cold stabilization at the end of your process of making wine. And I'm going to assume that you're going to sterile filter your wine because I think it's a good idea. Having seen what happens to wines sometimes that are unfilled. Cold stabilization will have negligible effects. Fining agents will aid in the settling of Brett, and when you rack, you'll leave your Brett in the bottom of the barrel. But I don't think you'll have any effects in terms of it'll reduce the activity because you'll be removing the Brett, but the Brett will have already done its main activity, and then the next step of your winemaking is sterile filtration and bottling, in which case you don't really have to worry about continued growth of Brettanomyces. I think I got all my questions. I think I'm good to go. Any more questions? I think we're good. Okay. Let me share the screen. There's a bunch of other stuff. You can, I'll just put this one up for now. Thank you for attending, of course. We have a website, LaFFORT.com, surprise, surprise. In the US, there are 4 locations. We have the main office and warehouse in Petaluma. We have a St. Helena store. Windsor, we have a store that's open only for harvest. In Paso Robles, we have a store as well, which is where Caitlin is based. If you've got any questions, any further information, shoot an email to any of us, basically, and ask about chitosan and say, Shaun Richardson, let's talk about this, and it'll get back to me for sure. So again, thanks for all attending, and we will see you next time. Of course, I can figure out how to stop.